is like one of the things that Alex Jones has talked about is how the right wing has co-opted the left wing to fight free speech.
Yeah.
And it's true. The people who want, but they've also, the right wing has also redefined free speech to not be actual free speech. So the right wing's talking about on social media and platforms that have terms of service. So like that's free speech doesn't apply there.
Yeah, well, that's a private platform.
Right, but they're talking because they don't understand regulations and laws and the actual First Amendment. They think that free speech just means you can say what you want. You talk to most right-wing people, that's what they think free speech means. And they think it's you can say what you want without consequence. So if you say some racist shit, you should be able to not get fired from your job. That's what they think free speech is. So when we're talking about actual free speech and protection of journalism and protection of free speech zones and public spaces, we're not talking about terms of service violations.
No.
But the right wing thinks we do. So this is where
But the right wing also seems to want everything to be a public space when it's convenient, and a private space when it's in their interest.
In the same way that they want to defend self-defense when it's convenient and used against black people, but when you have ASAP Rocky over in Sweden being detained well beyond what's reasonable. He's been detained over, I think, three weeks at this point.
Yeah.
Where's the fucking right-wing support for his self-defense? It's on video. He was committing an act of self-defense. It was not an attack. So all these people, Second Amendment, NRA people, just because he didn't use a gun, they're fucking quiet. Well, it's not just because he didn't use a gun, it's because he's black. Let's keep it real. So they're not defending him because he's fucking black.
I read recently that the NRA is having problems maintaining its financial streams.
Mm-hmm.
And incidentally, in the wake of the financial, I don't know what to call it, because it's not really a collapse yet, but it's kind of like the slow demise, it looks like. I don't know what to call it because it's hard to predict that kind of thing. I think the National African American Gun Association has emerged, and they've got like record admittance into their group. It's just sprouted up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like there's a lack of interest in firearms education and firearms control, firearms whatever. It just looks like the NRA is not the only voice.
Well, this is in the same way that the NRA never supported the Black Panthers when the Black Panthers were explicitly about arming black communities.
And they were using the same material as the NRA was giving out.
It's the exact same message. It's literally the exact same message, but then it was deemed to be a terrorist organization and racialized in the way that the KKK should be, in the way that Nazis should be. So what's happened with black arming is that it's been equated with terrorism in this country, whether it's Nation of Islam or Black Panthers. Black Panthers,
they started it up because they wanted to get a street light because the kid got run over by a car. That's my understanding.
And it's the same thing with the Crips.
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing with the Crips. So when people talk about gang shit, Crips and Black Panthers emerged specifically to try to protect communities from communities that were, or from police that were disproportionately abusing communities because they were not being policed by their own. So it's like you had Irish police coming in policing black neighborhoods, and then the Irish police would abuse the people. So this is one of the things that a lot of people don't understand because they're not taught about the history, the actual history of this country and the history of immigrants, is that Irish people were not upper class or first class citizens when they first came to this country, and they basically earned their way into whiteness by policing black communities.
Yeah.
So a lot of the early racist stuff that happened with police was Irish people trying to earn their way into whiteness. And this is like, you can, if you don't understand or you don't know about the history and it sounds crazy, just go fucking look it up. This is all like has been academically studied and broken down in a way that is not even really debatable, in the sense of, yes, Irish people were not white originally in the same way that Russian people are not white currently. Yeah. It's really weird to think of Russian people as not white, but Americans don't think of them as white people. Because then you hear Russians being told to go back to where you came from, as if like, you know, they're some foreign like threat to our existence by being not white and not American. And it's like, I think these things have root in Americans not being taught about the history that is the ugly side. So when you have he who shall not be named telling people who are from America to go back to their shitty countries
and fix their governments
and then come back. This is in a line of attack that has been associated with white nationalism and historically. But further, that motherfucker ran on the premise that this country wasn't great, but nobody told him to go back to fucking Germany where his fucking immigrant grandfather came from. The whole premise of his so there's an inconsistency. So it's all clearly all about
Representative race. Representative Omar has been a U.S. citizen longer than
Melania, probably.
Yeah.
So yeah, nobody told Melania to go back when his campaign was make this country great again, implying that it wasn't great.
You know, what's interesting about making this country great is that I never realized that it included getting license and permission from the Chinese government to open up a series of hotels complete with spas, massage parlors, and escort services.
Yeah, I mean, why didn't he open those in the heartland of America?
Well,
I mean,
I think you'd have to get a casino license in America.
You'd have to treat people fairly, at least in some cases, right?
Well, in Nevada, it's highly regulated. At least the escort industry is. So in a place like in Nevada, where it's heavily regulated, they're checked all of the time. And I'm sure that he's got his fingers in all the casinos that he can, but I think that there are still some regulatory bodies in the United States that have enough power to prevent, crazy shit happening in their jurisdiction.
Yeah.
But that's limited. I mean, obviously Nevada's a very odd case because they have the extremely low population density, but they've got resources out the wazoo.
Yeah. So this is kind of where I'm wondering if we've hit the point of diminishing returns on federal regulations, because they're not being applied equally across this country. So
I don't think they can. I think that's the dilemma.
I mean, they can't, but the problem is when they are, it's to imprison people.
Oh, yeah.
So you have like a large proportion of prisoners that are disproportionately affected by these federal regulations that permit non-minorities to invest in stocks in the things that minorities are being imprisoned for at disproportionate numbers in other states. So this is kind of where it's like, I think at a certain point, what has happened is the left wing has become too complacent in its engagement with tyranny, and what ends up happening.
The Speaker of the House decried the racist words, but not the racist. That tells me a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, the words were bad, but we don't think the person that he uses them uses the words with the full intent of the words. Well, maybe that's just a really clever way of calling, that person inept, but that seems like a lot of effort to call somebody inept.
Yeah, and it is a cowardly way to address the situation when you have a historically racist comment being made. When you have him at a town hall.
That's literally in the books on what is considered harassment.
Right, and then you have a town hall where people are chanting "send her back" or "send her home" or whatever the fuck those racist people were saying, and he doesn't say anything to stop it at the time.
No, he just
like
holds
a
his hands
coward,
up like he's
like a fucking coward
in the rays of the Almighty.
Right, and then comes out and condemns it later.
I hear that. It's like, wait, we send her back to Minneapolis.
Right.
Like she's gonna go back there anyways as soon as the session ends.
But the issue is when you have three out of these 4 people being told to go back where they're from to their shitty place
and fix their government.
Exactly, and it is the United States. That's the irony of these ignorant people commenting on stuff they have no basically they're telling them to go back to their fucked up America and fix it. So it becomes this situation where the right wing when you have.
These are the same people that love the military but hate socialism.
But
You know,
here's the thing.
It's like
how many people on the left wing have you heard say shit about ASAP Rocky?
I've read quite a few things. Most of them amount to, who is this person?
Who's engaging with the fucking Swedish government right now?
Oh, Justin Bieber and Donald Trump.
How? Justin Bieber's a fucking Canadian.
I know.
How are the only people in our country, or only people trying to get this dude out of jail physically, he who shall not be named, and a fucking Canadian? So right now we have a left wing that is so wrapped up in hating the fucking president for being a right winger that they'll ignore all the shit that they need to be doing. Like, the left wing needs to be moving. They need to be protesting. They need to be doing some shit in Sweden.
I think they've got a generation of people who are just now deciding they want to engage in political activity, but they're still caught up with like squirrel syndrome. And so everything that happens is a diversion.
Yeah.
It wasn't enough that, you know, there are a lot of high profile politicians who have been connected to a sex trafficker, an underage sex trafficker.
Who's still, I mean, he's not out now, but he was allowed to just roam fucking free.
And, you know, and so there was a week of memes about storming Area 51 to clap cheeks. That's like, I mean, it's funny. It's funny, but the reality is, we have, our military has electromagnetic field generating weaponry that causes excruciating pain when it's pointed at you and they turn it on. And if you sit there long enough, I've read about this stuff.
They shouldn't be allowed to use that on their own people.
That stuff, they tested on humans.
But I'm saying, the notion, we're fucking paying for Area 51. We're paying for Area 51. The military shouldn't be allowed to threaten people for storming shit they're fucking paying for.
I agree, but...
And this is the problem. That's the inherent problem with us being like beholden to something that basically uses us to generate capital, which we have no capacity to fucking check them on.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that the military came out and was like, anybody who tries to storm Area 51 will be met with force. Like, that's fucked up.
Yeah.
That's what the Second Amendment is for, NRA. The NRA is fucking quiet about this shit. They're gonna allow George Zimmerman to fucking shoot a black man because he's black and quote unquote right to self-defense. But when we're talking about actually checking the government on where they're spending our fucking tax money, where the fuck is the NRA? It takes Lil Nas X.
They don't want to know.
I mean,
because they think that they can have those guns too.
But that's what I'm saying is like this is the false premise of the NRA, and then the false premise of this quote unquote government that doesn't actually fucking work for us. They use us. Like,
well, there's clearly some kind of abstraction layer between what we're told is our democracy, our democratic republic, and the kleptocratic state that we've been dealt. We've been dealing with this since the 50s, really, where since the rise of the corporations and the rise of the kleptocratic state, it's really kind of built into the whole consumer cycle. Well,
and then you throw in technocracy on that, which is why I think the United States government is so scared of Facebook, because it was a shift into technocracy that they thought they controlled that has now gone rogue, in the same way that Bitcoin has gone rogue, in the same way that the technology has gone rogue. And you can't control things in the way that they think that they can. So it's like, in the way they want to control AI, and the way they want to weaponize social engineering, all of these things are tools that they use to control people, but they can't control those tools. And once they figure that out, then they try to shut those tools down. It's like this cycle that keeps happening.
There was a big intrusion in the Air Force, like their computer subsystems, like over a decade ago, and then they decided, well, now's the time to switch over to the new system, and it was like based off of PlayStation 2s. And they ran some specialized version of Linux that allowed them to run as clusters, and that's some impressive computing power. But I found it really, entertaining that they were running their systems off of PlayStations.
Well,
I just thought it was like, wow, that's incredible.
But what happens is now what we're starting to the cycles are catching up, because you have people who have arbitrarily gone into industries, bought up the resources, and then jacked up the prices. So in the past 10 years, it was GPUs. So this was where you have the fucking literal NASA competing with the crypto market to purchase GPUs. NASA.
It's even deeper than that. Companies like what's Bezos's moon-based company called again?
Blue Ball or some shit.
Blue
I
Ball.
don't know. Blue Moon.
Blue Dragon. We'll
Blue
just call
bitch.
it Blue Bitch. We'll call it Blue Ice. Blue Ice. I was reading about how he was under fire because he has all these side companies, these shell companies, essentially buying up components.
Right.
And essentially, he's gonna undermine the development of his competitors on any front, on any product.
It's been going on since the 1600s at least.
But
at least since the
Amazon
1600s.
has incredible power.
What people have abstracted into the Illuminati is this cycle of arbitrary purchase and price jackups, whether it's fucking tulips, whether it's Beanie Babies. It's not the same people, it's just the same cycle.
It's the cycle of economic interest, and
it's fake.
Yeah.
But that's the problem, is we're being sold this cycle as if it's an actual situation of rarity. No, we're sold scarcity as being a real thing, and it's all arbitrary. The scarcity is due to our inefficiencies. So when we're talking about scarcity of energy, scarcity of resources, it's only because we're inefficient if there's anything that's actually scarce. There's never any scarcity. It's always arbitrary. Because then when we talk about scarcity of elements, well, we look at it's our incapacity. We can't go to mine things in the fucking universe, so our restriction in space-time is what makes elements rare. It's not that they're actually rare in the universe.
We talk about slices of the pie as if there's only one pie.
Exactly.
But we make the pies.
Yep.
So
it's always...
And we make the material to
the
make
maker who's
everything
deciding,
to make the pies.
Yeah. The maker's always deciding proportions and whether the ingredients are going to be scarce or not. And this is where the pie we've been dealt is a pie that has weaponized diversity, it's weaponized the government, and it's weaponized the notion of progression within society, so that there's only actually 2,000 people who can ever be at the top, but everybody else is told that they can achieve this 2,000, but you have to be let into the group.
They've weaponized discourse.
Yep, 100%.
It doesn't have to be conflict. It doesn't all have to be conflict.
But this is why.
Imagine if somebody tried to create a Socratic method built around conflict.
I mean, they would never go anywhere.
No. It doesn't take long to realize that either. I mean, that's practically the foundation of all academic progress, is asking questions, and we're supposed to put our egos aside so that we can find truth. It's supposed to be the search for truth, irrespective of our egos. But it's about profit and about attracting more students.
That's an ontological view, which is not present in all schools of thought, which is now. The separation of schools of thought has been weaponized in the form of isolated schools of thought are inherently driven to reinforce their importance. So then anything that moves against the notion of an ideal individual school of thought towards unified theory threatens that school, so then they work against it.
Yeah, that's why it's so difficult to craft an individualized interdisciplinary program.
Right.
Because you're limited with a small group of people who have taken the steps towards something like cognitive science, and they're able to bridge multiple disciplines, and they're able to understand what's actually important when you start to where everything intersects. And that's something that I remember when I was at IU. My mom, she said, you should approach this thing with a more interdisciplinary mindset, because there's a lot you can get out of making these kinds of connections. This is really where the creativity comes from. And I mean, I understand the desire for hyper-focused education, because we want experts, we really do. But at a certain point, an expert in one school isn't going to see something else.
Yeah, they're deficient in some, by default, they're deficient in
It's
many
like,
other areas.
It's like in any brawler video game where you can apply skill points over time. If you only stack them in one region, sure, you might have like all of the most powerful
Right.
shields and all the most powerful punches, but you can't fly, and you
or-
might not have any psychic abilities.
On the same note, you wouldn't want a rocket scientist to do your brain surgery if
No,
you needed
God,
brain
no.
surgery. You want a brain
You want
surgeon.
a brain surgeon.
But conversely, you wouldn't want a brain surgeon to build your plane's engine.
Nope.
So there's these things that have happened in modern society where a person who is able to get to a point where they can, if a person is able to build a plane engine and do surgery, they're mythical. That's Dr. Stephen Strange.
Yeah.
That's fucking Bruce Banner. That's these people.
That's Tony Stark.
Right. So there's Shuri. There's these things that are so out of the realm of reach because what is necessary to get there is so specialized and elite, that it's not accessible to everyone. Even the elite cannot get to this status in the modern world.
So it occurred to me, I was reading through these threads, I saw somebody essentially ask the question, like, what's this acronym mean? And everyone knows, but it's one of those like, wait, are we really at a point where there's so much information that you have to tell people things again? Because during Edison and Westinghouse and Tesla days, I really believe those guys actually had the capacity to know everything that humanity knew up until that point. But you jump ahead 50 years and it's all different, and there's so much more that I don't think any one person could hold all that information. Exactly.
Like they didn't have access to any of the Eastern stuff.
Sure. Point. But then we get to this point now where we do have access, and you still can't know everything because there's just too much information. And so we're at this place where even if the information's out there, it's not enough to know that it's out there, because there are people out there who don't even know to ask those questions.
Well. But okay, on that point, so let's assume that Tesla or Edison could know everything up to that point. Clearly, that's not everything to be known. So is it even worth anything?
No, that's a good
That's like, is it beneficial to be the smartest person on the short bus? Like, that's a great achievement, but if you're in a room full of people who don't know anything, being the smartest person in that room is really no accomplishment.
No, it just means you're in the wrong room. Really.
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to be in a room where you're challenged.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's the thing, is like, I think that up until a point, it was possible to know everything that you needed to know.
Einstein fucked his cousin, bro. Einstein fucked his cousin. We never talk about that aspect. Einstein left his wife to marry and fuck, presumably, his cousin. So we hold this dude as being one of the smartest people who's ever lived, but he's a cousin fucker.
Yeah. Can't
argue that.
No,
well, I didn't make that shit up.
No.
I didn't fucking travel back in time and make him fuck his cousin. Sorry to break it to you guys who've been holding Einstein as the smartest person alive, but he's a fucking cousin fucker.
Well, God, I can't remember the guy's name. Is like the guy that calculated black holes through pixelation, and just trying to explain that we're all pixels essentially. I can't remember his name now. He and Einstein got into a big old pissing match about it, where they couldn't agree about the nature of the universe, because Einstein was trying to explain, and was like, oh, but it's always happening. This guy's like, yeah, but when I measure it, it's these discrete things. And he was like, well,
God forbid two white guys who can't
get in arguing
reach the
about quantum physics,
arguing about some shit that they can never actually fucking test. Like, yeah,
stuff that we wouldn't have the technology to test till 50 years after they die.
I mean, yeah. Or the capacity to reach the end of the universe to know if that rule applies to the end of the universe.
Yeah, it's just math for them.
Yeah, exactly. And it's math and a level of self-assurance that is not something that people should have. I don't personally think. Like, if you assume that your calculation works all the way to the end of the universe, but we can't fucking test it, that's a level of assurance that is not scientific. That's unscientific.
Yeah, I don't think that there's enough paper on Earth to write out that equation and to solve it. The solution alone would probably take you to the moon and back, if not further. Probably to the end of existence, because it's probably some equation that can never resolve.
Exactly. So we're talking about something that we know we can't measure, but we want to measure as much as we possibly can to satiate this level of like thinking we can figure it out.
I've counted every star in the galaxy and every galaxy in the universe. Our quantum counting engine can calculate every planet. I mean, that'd be really cool and all, but I mean, that's not. I don't even think that 50s sci-fi was that bold.
I think it takes like, if you were to count to 1 billion, it takes like 32 years or something. Just like counting. That's like numbers. We're not talking about information.
I think I've tried to count like as far like, and I always lose track once I get into high numbers.
I may even be thinking about the million, because I want to say it's 32 years, but that may be the million, and the billion may be like
that might be like 1,000 years or something dumb.
Yeah, it might be something stupid that's not even possible for humans to do.
Yeah, because at a certain point, like 600,455 takes a while to say.
Right,
like,
you can't do it in a second.
You can't even think it in a second.
Nope. So it becomes this exercise where the time that it takes to say something, just the number impacts how long it takes to do it. So then we're talking about, And
you have to have a computer to count that far.
So then, again, it's not that
and then
people
does the computer
aren't
actually
smart.
have enough memory to hold all of that information and calculate all of those changes? I mean, even our best computational models take a while, except for that AI, which can do it in like 3 minutes. But 3 minutes versus 8 hours that's a big leap in processing time. But it still takes 3 minutes to create the model.
Yeah.
And they don't even know if it's how it does it. So it's like, is that even really? Are we just creating these simulated universes in AI that have this entire existence that, like, in the blink of an eye, it's gone? Because if that's the case, then that's like...
I mean, it's a blink of an eye to us, but...
To them, it's the entirety of their existence.
Right. So proportionally, it doesn't feel like that.
Yeah.
Which is why, when we're talking about scales of, like, a dog's life is, like, 7 human years, it's like, okay, that's a weird way to put it, but it's not. Like, they're existing in the same amount of time as us, but proportionately to how much it feels like time has elapsed, that's one thing, but then how much they've also physically aged is another thing. So, like,
yeah, and we're also projecting a lot of, like, perception of time onto an animal.
Absolutely. And it's like a linear perception of time, in that we think that our linear perception of time is the accurate perception, and not that we're just in that because of our biological need or our predisposition for that experience.
I feel like animals like a bee or a hummingbird, especially hummingbirds, they're like flying like normal. They're just flapping like normal, and everything else is just slow. That's how I want it to be for a hummingbird. I'm not sure if that's the way it really is. It probably isn't, but...
Well, I don't know, because when they're not flapping, their motions are still pretty jerky and fast. Yeah. So it's like...
They're definitely...
Well, it's because their heart's beating, though.
Yeah.
That's what it is they have an internal thing that's keeping them... So if our hearts were beating at like 260 beats per minute normally...
Well, that kind of explains why people who experience the fight or flight effect will talk about time slowing down.
Right.
Because all of a sudden everything's functioning at 190% capacity, which means you're perceiving things more easily.
Well, okay, think of it this way. If your heartbeat is... We can break this down mathematically. If your average heart rate is like 60 beats per minute, and every beat produces blood flowing over your eye, that would be a peak and a trough of a wave. So you have basically 30 hertz frame rate of vision. If your heartbeat jumps up to 180. Fucking 180, all of a sudden you have 90.
Yep.
So it's like it's just simple fucking math. You're processing 90 hertz of information because your heart's beating faster. It's fucking simple math. There's no mysticism about it. We can break it down mathematically. So you're able to pick up 3 times as much information because your eyes are scanning 3 times as fast.
There's also there also may be more current with increased blood pressure, things like that. So if we make it analogous to an electrical circuit, then it's you're right. It's just at that point it's just overclocking the system.
Yep. And the issue is you can't overclock it forever.
Nope.
Which is why if this happens, once you get an adrenaline dump, once it's over, you're
pass
fucking
out.
yeah, exactly. You pass out. It's the same shit as overclocking a computer, but if you don't know what overclocking a computer is doing,
This is a poor analogy. If you don't know what
Right.
that is, hopefully everyone
or
who's listening knows
anybody
what that is.
anybody who's seen the Marvel universe when Thor shoots Iron Man in the very first encounter when they fight and his suit goes up to 400%.
Oh yeah.
That's overclocking,
Yeah.
but you can't do that. You can't run it 400% forever. It'll also melt everything.
Yeah.
So that's why he rebuilds his suit to be able to be charged by Thor's lightning. So in the later movies, it becomes a thing that
A
they
weapon.
do.
Yeah.
So Iron Man's suit gets overclocked.
Yeah, that's right. He directs the lightning bolt into the back of the suit, and it comes out of his chest array.
So this is like for anybody who doesn't understand overclocking, and you've seen the Marvel movies, you do understand overclocking. You just have to reinterpret what you think that word means.
Speaking of overclocking, I've had 2 computers that I tried to overclock, and once was because I was in a class where I had friends who were like into overclocking. And then the second time I did it, it was just like, I've got this old ass processor. I wonder what it can actually do. And I had this board that was several generations newer. So I just started turning it up, and lo and behold, it was incredible. I was running what amounted to a Pentium 2 at like over a gigahertz, and it was running like a high spec Pentium 3 processor. And I mean, it didn't last very long.
Did you see the temperature?
Oh god, it didn't. I don't want to say it rose quickly because it took about 30-40 minutes, but I watched the temperature rise like just degree by degree until you start to smell the dye, and the computer started acting really erratic, and then just shut off, and that was it. And after that, I always thought it's like, well, maybe it's easier just to buy hardware that already reaches a certain performance expectation and performance benchmark.
They're still gonna break down.
They're always going to break down because they.
And this inherently is why Bitcoin mining is not a good way for poor people to make money.
God, aside from the cost of electricity and electronics.
Yeah, because it's like I've seen a lot more people pushing this point of logic lately to try to get poor people into Bitcoin, but I don't think those people really truly understand the stresses that a machine goes under when it's mining. Like.
It's a benchmark
machine
test.
is
It's
capable,
running at full speed.
basically,
if you're not
yeah.
overclocking it, you're only getting 100% of its capability.
Because then I've ran ASICs before, and it's even ASICs aren't stable. Those things fail at least a couple times a month just because of the.
We have to update the script periodically, right?
That and the hardware just fails.
Yeah.
It just the fan runs too hot. And the fucking the motor will.
I remember when I was looking into that kind of thing, I remember checking out these crazy ass rigs in people's basements, and I ended up converting my basement into a dry space that I could use for that. And I was doing mostly like altcoins, and it was profitable up until the point that Bitcoin's value dropped below $7,000. But then here we are a couple years later, and the price is. It went back up, and I haven't really paid attention if it stayed there or not. But I remember thinking, it's like, well, this is actually done because the price of electricity isn't going to go down. And I looked into, the complexities of going solar to help offset any of that, but all that did was push the ROI from solar installation another 10-15 years away, which is untenable given the life expectancy of the panels. The technology we have just doesn't allow for the panels to last much longer than 20 to 30 years.
15 years.
Well, 15 is probably the realistic expectation, 10 to 15, but they say 20 to 30. And the panel, the physical exterior of the panel might survive, but the electronics will overheat at some point because exposure to the sun. It might be designed for that, but we can't project how long it'll actually last because none of these things have lasted that long.
Right.
It's like I know that if I go to a local hardware store, like a real hardware store where they've got guys who know where like the specific size of screw is or nut or nail or whatever. I know if I go there and I say I need a hickory handled claw hammer, 16 ounce claw hammer, they'll say, oh, well, this is what we got. And they'll probably have been selling that same claw hammer for the last 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, because it's it's not going to break. But it's not really how electronics work.
Right.
Not when we design manufactured time to failure. That's a thing.
Yeah.
That's that always actually bothered me. It's like, just say, you put a timer on it. If you're gonna do that, don't give me this like, oh, it might fail within this time period. Just be like, you got to replace it every so often, because that's the thing. And that's what people do anyways. I mean, I see used computers that are a generation old on eBay. It's like, there's no way that this person utilized this thing into death unless they were mining. And it's hard to imagine somebody spending... Okay, so people who are doing like GPU mining, they weren't spending the money on processors or on motherboards. They were spending the money on GPUs.
Yeah.
And because any motherboard with PCIe could support the card,
which caused AMD stock price to go up, but it was arbitrary.
Yeah.
It was all arbitrary.
And they couldn't meet the demand, and neither could NVIDIA, and they released specialized mining only products.
So this was like a weird period in GPU production that went solely for the crypto industry and pushed GPU hardware builds to new places, but not for the right reasons.
Yeah.
So now all of the GPU advances that happen for crypto don't necessarily help gaming that much.
Well, no, they do, because
they help a little.
The video cards are more robust and they can tolerate higher heat for longer.
Right, but that's about it.
That's only perceptible if you plan on keeping your system for more than 4 or 5 years.
Exactly.
And
that's kind of where.
Show me a game that doesn't require your graphics card minimum requirements update every even 2 years. Like, I feel like they have to.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's between that and the console wars, you have arbitrary restriction of game development based on hardware industries trying to. This is kind of where, again, we get back to when you do things for profit, inherently you're not doing them for themselves. And this is one of the things that people who are hardcore capitalists are going to have to acknowledge. It's inherently the problem with capitalism.
It's the difference between art and design.
Exactly.
They're so similar, but one of them is for itself and the other is to turn profit. And to hold one in the same esteem as the other is disingenuous.
And it's not that they can't cross over, but one is explicitly for one thing and one is explicitly for the other.
Yeah.
And I think this is where you get a lot of people who don't look at graphic designers as artists, because a lot of their stuff is specifically for profit and is not meant for...
they're definitely artists, but if they're engaged in the design process, then it's for a profit.
Like, is the McDonald's logo art?
Well, I'm pretty sure when Andy Warhol did it, they called it art.
I think that's a great philosophical debate to be had, obviously by somebody who's smarter than myself in that area, but I think that's one of those things people have to really look at. Is the Dell logo art? Is the fucking Burger King logo art? I think there's an argument to be made that it could be, but it's not.
No, I believe that there is an art to insert practically everything.
Right.
But not all outcomes are delivered as art, and not all outcomes. I mean,
this is where arts versus crafts come in.
Yeah.
I think this is where, that's where.
And a craftsman might be able to deliver art, but they might not be producing art.
Like high level welding is art.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you have high level welders that make art. But the act itself is art, or high level smithing.
The guys who make those crazy knives,
right.
the Damascus steel.
Yeah. But the act of them doing it is art.
Yeah.
And it is an art. And I think it's even down to the mandala approach, where it's like, we see, what is it? There's like videos of the dude who, what was he doing? I don't think he was making sushi. He's cleaning his paintbrushes. There's videos of this dude who he's an artist, but the videos are explicitly of him cleaning paintbrushes for the sound, for the, I think it's ADSR, or I forget the acronym, but it's like audio something synaptic response where they're
Yeah.
trying to get like high from sounds. But this dude's
That's like a big
most
binaural
prolific
thing.
he became an artist, but the thing that he's most well known for is the sound of him cleaning his brushes when he's done painting. So this is kind of where, again, it's like there is art in everything if we look for it, but it's not always the art that's the art.
That's like talking about the great American artist George W. Bush, who also happened to have been a president.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
You may not have known this, but he was also president of the United States of America once. Twice even.
Crazy shit. Artists can do anything.
Yeah, right. Well, it's that poster that was everywhere when we were in college. It was like artists are the people that can ascend through all levels of socio hierarchy. I think that's one of those things that's always I've always found really interesting, is that at a certain point, anyone who becomes really good at something, it really doesn't seem to matter what that thing was. They achieve some kind of status where it allows them a platform to branch off into other interests, and because they have divined some recipe for success, they're able to utilize that platform for more. I think we talk about Joe Rogan because he has a brilliant podcast that it's very entertaining, but he's also all over media. And I found one of his old stand-up routines, and it was funny. It was one of those things like, man, I completely missed this part of this guy's career.
That's funny.
And I'm not really into stand-up. Like it's fun. I enjoy like going to a stand-up show, because then you get to see the artist, the comic, interacting with the room, and not necessarily actually engaging individual people in the audience, because I feel like that's not really necessary. I like it when they tell long chain jokes that take a while to build up, and then they can revisit them periodically as they build up to the climax of their show.
Russell Brand's really good at that.
Russell Brand is really good at that. He's a smart dude.
And Eddie Izzard is really good at that.
Eddie Izzard he's also really shrewd. But Eddie Izzard is, like, I remember the first time I saw him, he walks onto the stage, he's wearing this like sequined suit looking thing, and he's wearing high heels, and then I realized this dude's got makeup on. And I can't remember anything else other than laughing really hard.
I was like, what the fuck is this dude's deal? 'Cause it's like, he never draws attention to it in the performance. No. And then it's like,
it doesn't even exist.
Yeah, which is where it's fucking hilarious that dude is like, he became popular in a time before real, like, it was like people were becoming more accepting of people's like personal choices, but he didn't give a fuck, but he still became popular. So that's kind of where it's this weird, like,
I feel like we've all forgot about this short period of time during the 80s when all of pop music was wearing crazy hair and makeup and skin tight everything. And it wasn't just pop music, it was also into like metal and rock and roll, and they were doing it in every facet.
Glam bands,
glam everything. It was a glam version of everything. Right. And so I feel like this isn't new. We've had plenty of phases where people were like ready to accept expression. Although I think in the glam phase, it was more like a outward rejection of societal norms of appearance.
Oh, yeah.
But now it's like, hey, this is what we're going to look like. I enjoy that.
Oh, I definitely do.
The thing I think about Russell Brand is so interesting is that I can't tell if he's eaten recently or not. Because I'm serious. He's really lanky, and it works for him because that's how he is. But like, I feel like the way he talks, even, it's like, man, I just want him to eat an orange or something. I'm afraid he's gonna like pass out. I like him. I think he's hilarious. I think he's really smart.
Well, I'm gonna try not to body shame.
I'm not trying to body shame Russell Brand. I just noticed that he's like a lanky dude.
He's skinny fat in a way where he's healthy, but you look at him and you're like, what's wrong? And it's because he's got feminine hips.
He's also got really pronounced cheekbone and jawline.
Yeah, his face looks like he's lost a lot of weight.
He just has really pronounced features.
Constantly. Yeah, his features are very...
His hands have pronounced lines. You know, he's got a... I bet he'd be a really interesting study, like a drawing study.
Right. Well, I think that's part of it, though, is because he's so confident in himself, he's not out trying to get, like, surgeries, or he's not constantly lifting.
Yeah.
So I think that's where what we're seeing is a dude who's accepted his body for what it is, but he's also not unhealthy, but he's also not trying to shape his body for societal expectations.
Yeah.
So that's why, again, I'm not trying to body shame. It's more so I think he represents somebody who doesn't try to align his physical appearance with what society demands be like a 10 body for a man, because then that's where he could do whatever the fuck he wanted.
Oh yeah,
at this point
he's got the resources.
The same way Jonah Hill or Chris Pratt. It's like
I imagine if Russell Brand decided to go like build the Adonis body,
he wouldn't be funny.
No,
I think that's part of it too.
It would change everything. It would change the dynamic. It would change.
Chris Pratt's one of the few people who've been able to lose weight and stay funny. It's something that when people, it's not that they tie their funniness to it, but I think intrinsically Americans who are largely obese and overweight don't want to laugh at somebody who's in shape. It's like, what, this good looking guy with abs, what the fuck has he got to make, fucking shut up and sit down.
Give me more Chris Farley, right?
Right, yeah. Or Kevin James.
That's kind of sad. I don't know. I guess everyone likes to think of, what was that other guy, James Belushi? Mm-hmm. He was a round dude.
Yep.
Round is a shape.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not the best of shapes, but
Dan
it's a shape.
Dan Aykroyd wasn't stand-up, but these dudes who we associate with funny, John Candy, fucking, go down the list. A lot of them are going to be fat.
They're not athletes.
Yeah. And we don't, or they have some feature that makes them...
quirky.
Yeah, like Kevin Hart.
Yeah.
Or Cat Williams. They're... The average, or not average, Joe Rogan,
he's like 5'8", right? 5'9".
Right, but he's like ripped, and he's always been ripped. But when you see him do his stand-up, he covers his body up.
Yeah.
So he wears like long sleeve shirts and like big dumpy shirts, so he doesn't look ripped on stage. And I think that's like...
that's something I was reading about bodybuilders. American bodybuilding is very serious. Mm. Like there's some really old schools of protein, carbohydrate, more protein, lift, exercise, do your and then like separating routines for different days and all that stuff. But it seems like it's one of the most serious fitness mindsets that I've ever encountered. It's like a different kind.
It's a disease.
It's not a discipline like martial arts. It's this it's overriding. It's beyond passion. It's like.
I'm straight up calling it a disease because, like, in the sense of, if you go back and look at the origins of it, it came from this specific culture, started with Joe Weider.
Yeah.
And Joe Weider, there's a lot of discussion about his proclivities and what he did off behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. And effectively, the original big, bulky, meaty guys that started this new wave were encouraged to do roids and get as big as humanly beyond humanly possible.
Yeah, like cut and chiseled in.
Right.
And
so this is where that whole thing came from Joe Weider's imagination of trying to get people to this next phase. So then it's like out of that we got the Schwarzeneggers and
the creatine bodies.
I mean, they're straight steroids. Yeah. Not creatine. They're straight steroids because at this time, this is pre-creatine, but pre-steroid abuse.
Yeah.
So
they probably hadn't even isolated it to the most effective ones yet.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. And part of the issue is they're not using steroids for anything but bodybuilding at this point. So it hasn't seeped into other sports where we're not seeing the Barry Bonds and the Mark McGuires yet. That's the Bash Brothers stuff and the juicing that comes in the 80s.
Yeah.
That's post-Weider stuff. but that's also contributed to.
You know, I just want to see a little star next to Jose Canseco's records or Mark McGuire's records. I just want to see a little star because I don't care that. I mean,
I think they did star McGuire's.
They did.
I believe so.
I know
they starred. I believe they starred Sosa.
As long as they put a star next to it, so we know.
Well, no, okay, no, let me rephrase. I know for a fact they starred Bonz's.
Yeah.
But I believe
Because
they starred McGuire's. I'm not positive.
Even within professional music, like orchestral musicians they find that they're taking meth so they can stay up and study their parts and learn their parts faster and be ready to go. And some people are reaching this state of like psychosis where they can't even play. Mm-hmm. And that's a problem when even musicians feel like they have to take performance enhancing drugs so that they can keep up. It shouldn't be like that. Music especially isn't supposed to be like that.
I don't know if that.
I think an industry is supposed to encourage that kind of behavior.
Well, but I don't know if we have Jimi Hendrix without drugs.
I don't know
if we have the Beatles without drugs. No. But they're not. It's always this is where the drugs were meant to destroy ego, not to help them make better music to make money. It's not a performance enhancing drug. It's a
creativity enhancing drug.
Right.
I think that's a very different thing.
It's still performance enhancing.
It's a different
but
kind
for
of
a different
performance.
And exactly. So I think that's kind of where
we're back to money versus artistic
art
intent.
versus craft versus is this for itself or for profit?
I mean, at the point of somebody playing in an orchestra, on some level they are athletes. Mm-hmm. They're absolutely athletes. They have a completely different set of acuity that they've developed over the years, but it requires as much time and effort and discipline. And there's a very strong athletic component to having to hold an instrument steady.
Well, and they're mathletes too.
Yeah, that too. You have to be able to synchronize with that many other people while watching some guy with hair like wave his arm around for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
I love that stuff though. I think it's fascinating. Anytime I see some big like orchestra or symphony, even like a big jazz band, it's always fascinating to me how you have a group of 10, 15, 20, 30 more people and they're able to synchronize like that. Mm-hmm. Because you go to a rock and roll concert and someone starts clapping and then somebody else starts clapping 100 feet away and next thing you know it's and eventually it comes into a big clap where everyone's synchronized after like 5 to 10 minutes. And I've had this theory for a while that it's actually a trick that has been employed by stage performers for years. Get the audience clapping and they won't notice how drunk old Jimmy is. It'll give us a little cover. They won't notice when we change songs. They're clapping. They're too busy being engaged. That's not true of all music cultures. There's some music cultures where the audience is very, very in tune with the music and they can clap and sync with the music perfectly.
Well, what I've noticed is white people and black people clap on different beats.
Yeah.
White people clap on the 1, black people clap on the 2.
Yeah.
It's like...
Well, that's like jazz, 2 and the 4.
Right, yeah.
The and and the of.
It's something that is culturally there, and it's not unavoidable to where I think this is kind of when people... There's like the notion that white people are offbeat a lot of times, but it's because they go on the 1 and the 3 and everybody else is on 2 and the 4. Which is like, I don't understand why. I mean, I guess because I'm black, I don't understand why people would clap on the 1 and the 3. But it depends on what you think the clap is representing. Because if the clap represents the snare, then obviously it comes on the 2 and the 4. In most percussion cadence, but
except in jazz,
right?
Come in anywhere.
Come anywhere.
The only thing that matters, the only thing that matters is that there is something at the 2 or the 4. I think.
I don't know if you can even clap to jazz music.
You got to go way back to like swing jazz, and then you can start clapping to it. Hoedown music, like Texas swing, which is basically like somewhere between blues and most jazz. That stuff you can clap to. Like roadhouse music. We're talking about like the boom tracks, not the standards, not the jazz that was written that people know and remember and request.
Yeah. That's not real jazz. That's like
that's just
a song.
That's just stuff they played in between real songs so they could get the crowd dancing. That's like, I think that's what
And I think this is the difference. Okay, people's perception of what a song is versus what jazz is.
Yeah.
Is like, I think to me, the notion of jazz is everything that's between songs in the sense of it's not transitional. It's not a melody that you can hold on to and repeat over and over that turns into a song or a chorus.
Variations.
Jazz
here,
is melodic
there.
and harmonic, but it's not necessarily a song because it doesn't follow a phrase.
That's like the deconstruction of all of Miles Davis's electric music, or electric jazz, where in a lot of ways he birthed nonlinear editing before computers existed. Because if you can listen to, I think it's either In a Silent Way or On the Corner. There's this one brief passage where you can hear him whispering to the producer. This guy named, I think his name Teo. He's like, you can hear, he's like, Teo, turn it up. and you know, it's like, they print that. And when you listen to it, you can almost hear where they splice everything and re-record it and reprint, because there are all these really weird, you know, the tape would eat up the artifact because it's not quite as accurate as we really want it to be. But when they do the digital remastering, there's these little noise elements that are actually kind of cool, because in electronic music world, those glitches are awesome because
it's like the cigarette mark on a visual.
Yeah, but you don't. It's not there. You don't really hear it. You can see it because it has spectral energy. But
I think this is where his approach and Sun Ra, they had similar approaches to music in the sense of, but this gets back into where I don't think it's possible to take drugs away from music creation, in the sense of, I don't know if you can get Miles Davis without drugs.
You can't.
You know,
you can't get Charlie Parker without heroin.
Exactly.
You just can't.
I was about to say Charlie Parker too.
You can't get John Coltrane. You can't get any of those guys without that stuff. And that's one of those things that, you know, it's. I feel like we had the '90s grunge era where all of those singers were, you know, shooting up and using drugs regularly, and then they all start dying. And I think that we're 20 years away from that now, but I think that at the same time we've been left with this scarred state of, we don't want our musicians to do that.
We just lost Whitney and Amy.
Exactly. We don't want our musicians to do that, but that's, unfortunately, it almost seems like that's the price that these bands had to pay. Somebody had to walk into the darkness so that they could see that untold sight and come back and tell everyone about it. And they, you know, in some way they're relying on their bandmates to bring them back. And I'm not trying to blame the people in bands who lost their singers, because that's bullshit. I'm not saying that at all. More that, you know, it's impossible to understand what somebody who does that is actually going through, because we're not doing that with them. We're just there standing off the sidelines watching them get close to the edge.
I think part of it would be also, we look at Dave Grohl and Kurt Cobain.
God, Dave Grohl's got such a fantastic career.
People need to look at Dave Grohl and ask him what he did to not die.
Didn't do drugs.
I mean, obviously that's one of the things, but it's deeper than that, in the sense of, when he goes back and looks at his path, he wasn't the front man. No. He was the back guy. How does he survive being the guy who's not getting the accolades, who's not getting the shit, until 20 years later?
It's funny you mentioned Dave Grohl, though, because when I think about Nirvana, I'm pretty sure that he was the reason their song sounded interesting.
Of course.
Because he was the one that gave it all the rhythmic vitality.
Dave Grohl's always been...
I know, he's a super rocker. Yeah. He can get up and do whatever he wants, and he's awesome. I think that, you know, on some level, it's a business. Music's a business. And some people recognize that really early on, and some people are more into being the artist. And there's a marriage that happens somewhere between the two of them, where someone is business-minded and someone really is focused on creating the content, or shaping the direction, or navigating through the sea of distractions to make sure that they reach the goal, that they see their project through in its completion without compromising too much of it. And that has to be balanced with somebody who can also navigate the complexity of an industry and say, hey, this is what we got. No, we're not going to budge on that. And so on some level, I think that's why Foo Fighters are exceptionally successful. Exceptionally successful is that they've all have enough experience to navigate the business side well enough that they have carved out a creative space where they can continue to make new music and exciting music. And it doesn't, I mean, they sound like they're getting older and more mature, and I couldn't tell you what their song is. I just know when I hear them, they've got an identifiable sound. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe they have figured out how to be young forever. And I think that's actually the ultimate goal of rock and roll, was to, attain immortality. It's not just the glorification of sex, drugs in itself. It's more immortality. That's why we still talk about Jimi Hendrix. That's why we no longer are talking about guys like Elvis and who was that piano player who also diddled his cousin? Jerry Lee Lewis? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
The other cousin diddler. There's I think once we start to unpack and really look through the history of rock and roll, we're going to find that a lot of the heroes are disappointments, and a lot of the people that should have been heroes were not noticed because they didn't do a bunch of dumb shit. And that's I think that's just the way that the industry has created it. It's divisions. You can make more of a splash by acting like a clown than having some dignity and just delivering a good product. I think that's where we get guys like Bob Dylan, who is like, no, this is how I do it. And people love him. He's not compromising. And then they make movies about him where they have like random actors portraying him. It doesn't make any damn sense.